guys, Dr. Mike Hotel here for RPU and RP Plus into lecture number 6 in our Arguing to Convince course. This lecture is finally on exposing the nature of the disagreement. So exposing the disagreement, and the subtitle here is fine-tuning the disparity in views. What is it that we mean by fine-tuning? We'll get to that in just a bit. So today we're going to talk about, first of all, the importance of proceeding with commonalities. We talked a lot about how to do that, but just kind of reiterate why, when we're talking about exposing disagreement, we have to have the commonality set in place first. We're going to talk a lot about using the proper tone. Tone is incredibly important here. We'll talk about why it's important. We're going to talk about preventing something called disagreement creep, which is when you start disagreeing about one thing and then you learn that you don't agree about other things with the person. No surprise, no two people agree on everything, and you start to argue other things that aren't related. We're going to try to see how to prevent that or to be very aware of it. We're going to talk about how to specify and quantify disagreements so that we can be very precise exactly what it is we disagree about. And then we're going to talk about confirming disagreements to get the other party in the discussion to say, yes, this is in fact what we disagree about. Because once we get all of that set in stone, it becomes a much more straightforward thing to talk about what we actually need to talk about, as opposed to having this kind of nebulous idea of, well, we disagree and we don't really exactly know what about, and maybe it's about everything, maybe that's just a small thing. The more precise we can make things, the less emotional we can make things, the better things will go. So first, it's very important to proceed with commonalities. And we already talked about this a lot, but it's worth repeating or worth emphasizing. It's really tempting to just jump right into the disagreements. Like, whenever you see someone state views in any capacity that you disagree with, we all have a temptation to be like, that's wrong, and this is why it's wrong. Right? To just go straight for the disagreement. It's super tempting, and it's even tempting to forget about the disagreement and just basically tell them why you're right and why they're wrong. As a matter of fact, the most tempting thing of all is just to tell people your version of what's going on, right? And sometimes not even, that's just short of an insult. Be like, you're wrong, you're an idiot, here's the truth. It doesn't even attend to their argument, to their idea of reality. It doesn't even talk about it. It just says, that's all wrong, and then here's why I'm right. That is not a discussion procedure we're going to talk about in arguing to convince, because that form of argument has convinced essentially no one ever. It's a very bad idea to try to convince someone like that if you don't establish commonalities. So we have to establish commonalities. Why are we establishing? What are we trying to prevent? Why are we establishing these commonalities to prevent these things? First of all, if you don't establish commonalities and you focus on disagreements right away, you can antagonize the party and make it seem like it's a personal attack, right? Whenever people are phrasing their views and all of a sudden the first thing they get is a disagreement, humans are more or less hardwired to see disagreements as a form of conflict. If you just come at them straight with a disagreement, they could get very defensive. As a matter of fact, if you come at them with a disagreement, you're yourself channeling very antagonistic energy. You're actually going to antagonize yourself. You guys ever piss yourself off reading like YouTube comments? You're like, damn it, why do these people think these things? And you're antagonistic and all you think about is disagreements and maybe not an underlying way to try to understand each other, understand that you have a lot of commonalities. That can settle the tone much better. Very related to that is as soon as you start to disagree right away without established commonality, that basically it promotes a combative view of ideas versus the correct view, which is searching for the truth. Remember, humans are all fallible, but all of us have various ideas of what the truth is. And because there is one objective truth and a lot of fallible humans trying to examine it, the best way to see the reality of ideas is all ideas are approximations at what's really going on. So it's not one idea versus another and winner takes all. It's two ideas communicate their best and worst estimations. The worst are discarded in this communication. The best are put forward, and that new hybrid idea meets the truth a little bit closer. That's how argumentation, that's how discussion is really productive. But by starting with disagreement, you start this vision of ideas as just clashing and there's a winner take all. And that's just not productive. We don't want to go on that route because, again, that doesn't take us closer to the truth. It's pointless to argue if we don't get closer to the truth unless we think arguments are fun for no reason. And obviously, it's not going to convince anyone because when people get combative, they get very, very unlikely to be convinced. That's another problem. increase recalcitrance, or basically people's willingness to go into their little bubble and just not change their opinion. As soon as you get real combative right up the front end, if you just start with a disagreement, like, here's why you're wrong, people get recalcitrant. They literally just recede, and you're like, do you think that this is right? Maybe you were wrong. Like, no. Even if they can clearly see they were wrong, they just won't have it because we started off with a combative tone. And we need to have a settled emotional kind of playing field to really make inroads into the underlying landscape of information that holds up both ideas so that we can find commonalities, find a direction of the truth together, and actually get somewhere. As long as we have this ideas combating and battling it out, it's a distraction from the actual work it takes to find the truth. We don't want that, right? So on the plus side, if we have a big base of commonality, it makes disagreements much easier to broach. Just think about it. Let's say you're having a discussion with an alien who wants to destroy the Earth and every single life, life on it, right? You're having a discussion with the alien. He's your mortal enemy. What are you going to agree on? Probably nothing, right? But take another example where same alien, but your two planets, Earth and his alien planet, are allies against a much bigger, badder alien, and you have to work together. You both want life. You both want prosperity. You both want your planets to survive. How much arguing are you going to do with your ally alien? Well, you're probably going to be like, hey, let's work together and get stuff sorted so we can get close to the truth, develop our mega weapon, and destroy this other this other super evil alien race or whatever. If it's just an ally, if you have a lot of commonalities, if you're working together, you're just going to solve problems 50 times faster, and you're going to get at the truth because it's not personal anymore. They want to develop the mega weapon as much as you do. Everyone works together great, but if you're against each other, geez, you get nothing done, right? And it very much works this way in actual arguments, not just with aliens, but also among people as well. To that effect, super important part of this topic is using the proper tone. Using the proper tone not just establishes commonality, but using the proper tone continues the mood of cooperation and reduces the mood of conflict. Okay, so everything we say here on how to maintain proper tone and why is fundamentally to that end. Proper tone always reemphasizes how you speak, how you write. With every word, with every phrase, with every paragraph, you're re-emphasizing we're in this together, we're on friendly terms, nothing bad is meant, let's cooperate. As opposed to with every word, with every phrase, with every paragraph, re-emphasizing you're wrong, you suck, I'm right, you'll fall in my war of arguments and you'll be defeated and I'll be champion. That's going to get nothing done, so we want to minimize that and increase the cooperative tone. So here's the deal. The reality is that disagreements are just indicators that both parties have an opportunity to deepen their knowledge on the subject. Even if you're completely right, every time you debate with someone that is completely wrong, you get to rehash your ideas about being completely correct, and you get to phrase them better, you get to re-establish or refamiliarize yourself with the landscape of the truth, and that makes you more of an expert if you're already an expert. Very few of us are experts, so this is really kind of an extreme scenario. Most times, you're somewhat wrong, they're somewhat wrong, you're somewhat right, they're somewhat right, and by communicating, you just get closer to the truth and both people deepen their knowledge. So this idea that disagreements are a war between two people is just flat out wrong and counterproductive, and it's not worth seeing it like that. Why am I telling you this? As soon as you see kind of in your own heart, so to speak, that disagreements are really opportunities for knowledge and cooperation, you're just going to naturally tend or trend towards more neutral and cooperative language and tone. But if you still think that it's war, but we just got to learn to talk fake like this so we can really get them, nothing's going to come natural to you, and you're going to start snapping all the time and getting really mean and not accomplishing your goal. So the reality, the truth is, disagreements really are just opportunities to learn in a cooperative manner. If you see them like that, you'll just be way better at convincing anyone of anything and way better at promoting learning versus promoting hostility. Disagreements are not indicative of anger. They are not indicative of hatred. They are not indicative of resentment. They are not indicative of stubbornness. They're just an opportunity to learn or take a better path. Imagine if you had a spouse or a girlfriend or a boyfriend that wanted to take a certain route Let's say that she was going to visit New York City and drive from Washington, D.C. And she's like, well, so I'm going to take, the following roads and get there at this time. Let's say that you know the traffic a little better because you've made that drive. You actually want to talk to her and convince her to take another road. Are you trying to convince her to take another road because you're angry? No. Because you hate her? That's nonsense. Because you resent her? Why would you give her good advice about saving an hour through traffic if you resent her? That's backwards. Because you're stubborn? No way. Because you want her to have the best possible information so that she could have a better time herself. Because it's a totally selfless act, it turns out, or selfish because you like to see her happy. So it's one of these situations where that's a really good example of the fact that disagreements aren't these things where just one person's right and wrong and the other person badgers that one until they just give up. It's all for the better. And if you see disagreements like that, it's much easier to talk to people in a way that really offers them the advantage. So, if you're talking to someone, you're trying to get them to take a better traffic route, you're not you're probably not going to be like, you're an idiot. I can't even believe you wanted to take the 95. Are you nuts? You should take this other road because it's way better. You'd be like, hey, listen, honey, or hey, listen, I think it's totally awesome that you want to take the 95. It usually works, but unfortunately, Thursdays is just a total shit show. I really would just take this other turnpike. It's much better. I know it usually sucks. Give it some thought. Because if you convince them and it's all coming from a place of really good stuff, better things will happen. That's a good example of how to see disagreements, not as just a war between two people, but truly out of a good place. And here's the deal. A lot of people will perceive disagreements that if they lose them, it means that they're dumb, right? A lot of people, current speaker included, have some hang-ups about their intelligence. People like to see themselves as intelligent and competent. They don't like to see themselves as often wrong. And when they're made to feel that they are wrong in a disagreement, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll start thinking it's an insult on their capacity as a human. It's an insult on their intellectual abilities. So that couldn't be further from the truth. Most intelligent people are wrong a lot. Right? A lot. And disagreement doesn't mean the other party is dumb. On every single side of every big debate in science, there have been geniuses on both sides. Think about that. In every single big discussion, relativity versus classic mechanics, Einstein turned out to be right. Was the physicist he was arguing about stupid? These were the smartest human beings of all time, just short of Einstein. Some of them might actually have had raw IQs higher than Einstein's. Who knows, right? They just happen to be incorrect. The real difference between smart people is that they're more likely to quickly change their views when presented with good evidence. That's the real sign of supreme wisdom and intelligence, is when given good evidence, they go, oh, and I was wrong, and I'm switching sides now. I'm in this argument, right? So a lot of times people, when you disagree with them, will initially perceive it as, oh, you're saying I'm stupid. Absolutely couldn't be further from the truth. You shouldn't feel like that when people disagree with you. You should very much not carry a tone in your own arguments that convinces people that if they start agreeing with you after a while, you prove them to be dumb. Here's the deal. Another point for you to consider, for you to feel, for you to take away so you can establish your own good tone. Most people are well-meaning in general, and a disagreement does not mean the other party is poorly intentioned or evil. For example, back to our continual example of the sport coach who doesn't want his athletes to weight train. Is that sport coach evil? Is he establishing that weights shouldn't be lifted by athletes as just the first step in an empire that's going to reestablish global slavery and domination and just take us back to the Dark Ages? No, that's probably a good person. He probably has dinner with his family every Sunday and kisses his children before they go to sleep. It's a fine person. He just honestly thinks that weight training gets athletes hurt and isn't necessary. Everything else is just fine, just a great person all around, maybe just a normal person all around. It just has one opinion. A lot of times when you get into disagreements with people, it's really tempting to think, okay, this person thinks this. Holy shit, you are, as is now the popular term, literally Hitler, right? Which is a joke because only literally Hitler was literally Hitler, right? Well, for these opinions, you're literally Hitler. You are just an evil person for having these opinions. The thing is, Most people are fundamentally good people. There are totally fundamentally evil people, but you probably don't debate people who work for the North Korean spy agency every other day. So you probably meet most people who are just very well-intentioned. They just happen to have a different opinion. So when you meet people and you're discussing with them, don't yourself assume that they're bad people. They just might be incorrect, or you might be incorrect and not know it, and they might be able to prove you better. So come at it. This is just a difference in opinion, and we both have an opportunity to learn versus that person, he thinks, what? He's just got to be the worst person ever. She's just got to be terrible. That's almost never the case, right? And here's the deal. You got a big uphill battle, and here's why. Humans are hardwired to predisposed to consider debate as conflict. Okay? People in parliaments across the world's history, in every governmental body, up until modern times and even in modern times, have literally fist fought each other. You go YouTube videos of South Korean parliament and people are literally taekwondoing each other. It's like 1995 and there's people fighting in parliament. Why would anyone fight anyone in South Korea is beyond me. This is one of the most peaceful countries on earth. What were they fighting over? It was just like a Senate debate. And it was like some guy was like, I think you're wrong and you're an idiot. And the other guy was like, well, I'm going to beat you to death in your own chair. And they sure as hell tried. By the way, it was really sweet because some of the guys, there's another one from Japan, and some of these guys are judo trained. And there was actually some really good judo on display, which was really sweet. I've never seen you wouldn't expect that in American Congress. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So people get into fistfights over arguments all the time. Humans have this innate temptation to see disagreements on just the logical structure of the universe, oftentimes about nothing remotely relevant, as personal. There are entire fields, hundreds, thousands of scientists that over completely esoteric ideas about computer programming, molecular theory, about spectral phenomena in the upper atmosphere. There are scientists that cannot be in the room with other colleagues that think differently about these ridiculous nerd problems that nobody gives, frankly, a shit about except them. They're so pissed about these total minutia that just happen to be the core of their career. They literally can't be seen in a room with another person that they disagree with because they literally want to kill them. They want to kill each other. That's how bad it is. And it's about nothing relevant to anything in normal life. So you can imagine that anytime you want to argue to convince about life, normal things that actually relate to life, the struggle is uphill. So the reason that we have to have a conversation about using proper tone is that it is so hard to do so. We have every resistance to it possible, right? So how do we get around this? We have a guideline for you of how to actually use the proper tone. So here are some tone guides. We have six kind of guidelines, little rules, little tricks to make sure that your tone is spot on and is as good of a job as possible at deflating the sort of conflict mentality. First, every time you engage the other party, you want to defer to that party in speaking or posting or expressing their views in any manner, digitally or physically, first in every opportunity. You should always, instead of being like, well, here's what I think. No. What do you think, other party? Or if they're like, so here's what I think, you say, please explain. Let them go first. Let them proceed. Why? Because enemies don't usually let each other go first. If you're debating someone and you're really fired up and they're like, well, tell me how you think. Please list your stuff first. You go, apparently they want to know what I have to think. And they're being very polite. You can't hate someone that much that you're like, whatever, I still hate him. You're like, all right, let's see where this goes. At the very least, it calms the waters just a little bit. Point number 2, you want to use cooperative language. This is a very minute and very insidious point that when I read over other Facebook debates, which I do a lot, part of my research for making this presentation is years of reading other arguments that I wasn't even in. When you use the term I think, my idea, that's probably the worst one. Well, my idea is, okay, so if you manage to convince that person that you're right, it's not that you showed them closer to the truth. It's that they have to drop their army's flag and pick up your idea. You've now essentially alpha maled or alpha femaled them into joining your tribe. It's your way, but it's not your idea. It's an idea. You can't own knowledge in the grand scale. It's just an opinion that you have, but you want to present it cooperatively. So you want to just discard I, me, mine. You want to use cooperative language, us, we. For example, let's take a look at this, not, hey, let me show you how this works. Does that make sense? So you want to use cooperative togetherness language. It sounds really hippy-dippy, but I promise you it works. At the very least, they're going to think that you're more of a wuss than they thought. Great, because then they're going to not be so prone to be conflicted against you. Nobody picks on a wuss, but if they think that you're a real, like, oh, you really got these ideas, they're just going to try to butt heads with you. If they think, oh, this is like a kindergarten teacher type of person, they might actually get nicer to you, and that's exactly what we want. Next, number 3, super important. It's really difficult to fake curiosity about someone's views, so don't fake it. Be honestly curious and inquisitive about their views, even if someone presents to you views that you clearly know are wrong. At the very least, you can be inquisitive and curious as to how they develop those views, or what the underpinning landscape of the rest of their views are, right? Even the most morbid subjects, even the most disturbing subjects can in you generate a curiosity and an interest about how it is that they got started, so maybe that we could prevent them in the future, right? I know for a fact that some of the intellectual leaders that I, read about and listen to on podcasts, they're very much against terrorism. Some of these people have literally engaged in calm civil discourse for hours at a time with imprisoned, current, dangerous terrorists. These are the people that fundamentally want to destroy the very civilization this person represents. They talk to them calmly, ask them about their background, their past, their ideas. They take their people seriously. Now, do they like that person? Of course they don't like that person. But they're honestly curious about their ideas because they want to know where the stuff comes from so that maybe we can talk other people out of being terrorists. Does that make sense? So you want to be honestly curious and inquisitive about their views. Once you are that curious and inquisitive and it comes from an honest place, people pick up on that. Wait, this person really wants to know why I think this? Okay, well, I'll tell them because it's kind of cool. It's very cool when someone actually wants to know where you're coming from. It means they care. You're much more likely to give due diligence and not be conflicted with a person who cares versus like, can you imagine an argument where it's like, well, you can just shut up. I don't give a shit what you think. Here's the truth. I mean, who's got time for that? No one's going to be convinced by that. Can you imagine someone's like, look, you're wrong. Here's the reality. A person reads it. They're like, oh, you're totally right. I was wrong. That's never going to happen. But when someone's like, look, tell me what's going on. I want to hear your perspective. You're like, ooh, okay. And if they're like later, like, oh, I kind of think this may be the truth. You're like, maybe, but thanks so much. Thanks for hearing me out. And maybe your view is true too. They kind of owe you at that point to at least listen to your side as well. Number 4, you want to treat their positions and views with respect. Okay, like LOL didn't read. You guys know, like, you see a Facebook debate or something or a YouTube debate, and they go TLDR, like too long, didn't read, haha. But here's what I think. Okay, you don't know how intelligent someone is when you're discussing something with them on the internet. After a while, it becomes apparent, but at first, you for sure don't know. I would, basically, you should have a respect for every person that has an opinion, and I would say pretend/assume that they're smarter than you. Pretend/assume that they're super smart, right? Imagine if Einstein held some ridiculous idea. Would you LOL didn't read Einstein, right? I've had this happen to colleagues, to friends. I've had it happen to myself where, on my Facebook profile, it's a picture of a meathead. And I've had people who didn't know who I was be like, okay, listen here, dummy. Let me explain to you how evolution works. And I was like, wow, I must have missed that from like 3 courses I've had, in my undergraduate career on my way to a PhD. It eventually, 3 of those courses were in advanced evolutionary theory. I'm sorry I missed that. And all of a sudden they're like, or you start talking in terms they don't understand. You're like, oh, I thought you knew about RK selection theory. You seem to be an expert in evolution. They're like, and then they look really, really dumb because they're like, oh my God, I assumed this person was dumb. Turns out they know more than me about this. You don't want to be that person. Come at every single opinion, every single person with respect. If the opinion is ridiculous, just pretend it's Einstein holding a ridiculous opinion. Right? I've met numerous very intelligent people that believe all sorts of weird things, ghosts and aliens, things that I think are totally bunk. But I don't joke with those people that think they're stupid because some of those people are smarter than me, right? And you want to give everyone respect. Why are we giving respect? It's not, part of it is just for kumbaya, the world's going to cooperate type of stuff. But here's the real reason. If you want to convince anyone of anything, If you respect them and you communicate that respect, that you may not agree with their ideas, but you respect them deep down and you respect that they have ideas, they're going to be much more likely to be convinced by you versus if you just objectively disrespect them. How many people have you ever seen convinced by another person who had an undertone of disrespect? I mean, it's basically impossible. I don't know if that's ever happened to anyone. But like, you're an idiot, you suck, here's why you're wrong. And they're like, oh wow, you're totally right about everything. I'm an idiot, I suck, here's why I'm wrong. Now I'm one of you. That doesn't happen. People will resist to the ends of the earth if they think they're still right and they think you're wrong. It doesn't matter, because if you insulted them, nothing matters. They're never going to fall over for you. Number 5, you want to express the disagreement as tentative and as open, okay? So you don't want to tell them what it is they disagree about. You want to kind of just try to guess. So you want to say, so it looks like you view weight training as unhealthy. Is that correct? You want them to set you straight, for them to be like, well, no, what I'm really saying is blah, blah, blah. You don't tell people what they're disagreeing with you about. You look at it as open book and you let them tell you what they're disagreeing about. Big deal. Again, scroll on the internet. Plenty of people who've never convinced anyone of a damn thing, telling people who they're disagreeing with what those people think. They say, so you think that blah, blah, blah. No, that person never thought that at all. It's really easy. It's actually a fallacy for this called the straw man fallacy, to destroy an argument that a person never held. Right? I actually just had the displeasure of reading a letter from a university committee that was basically wrote a complaint letter to its university for having a certain speaker come in. And they basically said that the speaker is, antithetical to modern ideas of justice and just a terrible person and is racist, sexist, homophobic, every single slur they threw at this person. And they basically imbued this person with views that they just don't have. Now, couldn't he convince anyone with that stuff? No, I mean, if you actually ask that person, be like, do you really believe this stuff? They'd be like, no, I don't believe any of it. Be like, well, what the hell are we arguing about, right? If you want to have an argument against fake views that no one ever held, you can just do that at home. You can just pretend a person has, hey, literally Hitler. You can pretend you're sitting across from Hitler, and you say, so you think it's a good idea to kill everyone on Earth pretty much? And he'd be like, yep. And you're like, you're wrong. He's like, oh, you're right. You got me. You're like, I want an argument against Hitler, right? If you want to talk to other people, you want their views, because you're there to discuss their views, not your ideas about what their views should be to make it more convenient for you or more emotionally sound for you to win an argument. One of the biggest downsides to giving people their views is a lot of times when we caricature someone's views for them, we make those views much more straw-manish, much more dragon-like, breathing fire, much more simple and one-sided. Right? Wouldn't it be easy? You guys ever watch the news on TV? You get the two talking heads debating a side. They're both convinced that the other side is full of just totally moronic people that just don't know anything. There's no concept of the world whatsoever, and there's never any nuance, right? If you look at political debates, if you look at the extreme left and right in America, for example, you got one side being like, okay, extreme right-wingers are basically all Nazis, they're racists, the worst people ever, they're unbelievably stupid, no individual who's intelligent or compassionate at all could hold any of these views. And the other side are crazy social justice warriors. They're basically all card-carrying Marxists. They want communism across the whole world. They don't know anything. They don't have the emotional maturity of a 5-year-old. Boy, is it easy to debate against those actual caricatures if they were real. It turns out they're almost never real. Individuals from both sides have some pretty good points, and most sides have individuals that are thoughtful people that have some very nuanced ideas. They think some of the stuff they're saying that's extreme is worthy, but other stuff is complicated. When you tell a person what their views are, you usually just eliminate the complication. Be like, oh, so you stand for Hitler or for Mao and Marx? You're evil and wrong. Case closed. Well, geez, man, if people had simple views like that, arguing would be easy as hell. But the thing is, they almost never do. So never tell people what it is you think is wrong with their argument or what you think their position is. Always ask them. They'll tell you, and you reconfirm, then you've got a conversation on your hands because it's on paper, to some extent, what it is they actually believe, right? Last one, number 6. You want to approach every disagreement from kind of your heart as, I'm wrong, and this party is going to set me straight. So, for example, if someone's like, I think X, Y, and Z policy should be signed into law, you come back to them and say, hey, listen, so I think something else, but I just must be totally off base. Can you let me know why I'm wrong? Here's the deal. If they're right, or if they're closer to the truth than you are, you're getting a free education. Success. You just got set straight. Can you imagine if someone's like, well, XYZ is what I think, and you're like, I must be totally wrong because I think ZYX. Turns out they're a professional economist. And they're like, well, here's 5 position papers, and here's a really good explanation of what's going on. You're like, holy shit, thank God I didn't start shit with that guy. And you read it, and you're like, wow, this is really convincing. How the hell did I not know this before? Thank God I met this person on the internet. It happens all the time. And on the other hand, if they make a fool out of themselves, you've given them just enough rope to hang themselves with, right? So if you're like, convince me because I seriously don't know what's going on here. I must be wrong because I thought it was this, but you think it's this. And their argument is, what? You're an idiot. Yeah, well, that's what I believe. And you're like, wow, that's so convincing, right? Everyone reading that, you included, after a couple of discussions, you're like, hey, well, thanks for your time. You egress out of the argument and you go, well, I guess I was right because that person has no idea what's going on. Either way, the truth is exposed. And remember, that's what we're really going for. We want the truth, and the truth doesn't belong to anyone. It's out there somewhere. They might be closer, you might be closer. We're coming together, and we're walking closer towards the truth. Really good ideas about tone. So, just a quick example, right? For our, conversation about athletics and weight training, right? Wrong tone, right? For example, holy shit, you really think that weight training does more harm than good? Right? What are we doing here? Holy shit, we're like surprised in a really negative way. You really think that weightlifting, we're basically mocking them at this point, right? And we're mocking them with a position we think is absurd. There's everything wrong that we possibly could in one phrase, as just short of insulting them directly, right? A better way to say it is, okay, so you seem to be coming from a view that weight training in athletics has some downsides that many people are ignoring. Could you please elaborate on some of them? You're ready to learn. You've given them respect. You've given an opportunity to really talk to you. Now you're going to learn stuff either way, and they're going to either convince you of some really good points you didn't consider, or you're going to convince them of some points you didn't consider. Everyone's going to learn, or at the very least, you're not going to waste your time. Problem solved. Tone is incredibly hard to maintain. Before you ever get this down 100%, no one ever gets it down 100%. I have slip-ups where I lose it on people. You gotta try your best. It's an always ongoing battle. It's not like once you establish a tone in a debate, everything's great. Because you establish a good tone, things go well for a while. And either it's a face-to-face verbal discussion, or if it's on the internet and a forum debate, then at some point, someone might slip up, or some third party might come in and be like, you guys are both wrong, you're assholes, blah, blah, blah. And everyone gets pissed. Working on tone is always bring yourself back to being there's a good perspective, an open mind, not negative, positive, and cooperative. And you have to bring that person back to every now and again. Of course, you only bring them back by the way you talk about them, but basically exuding your own cooperation. Here's the deal. Last thing, and it's not even in the slides. Don't ever tell people that their tone is wrong. You are not there to pedantically teach them how to argue. You are there to discuss the discussion. They didn't come to you for tips on how to argue about stuff. Don't ever tell people, well, your tone is real shit, so I'm not going to talk to you. What you should be is nice, because you're violating your own tone guidelines by doing that. Does that make sense? You can't go out there. You don't have to educate them about tone at all. The only thing you do is lead by example. So when they're angry and they're pissed and they're yelling, you say, hey, I totally hear you. Let's take this one at a time. You can't say, hey, you shouldn't be yelling. You're already telling people what to do. Don't do that. That's a violation of one of our rules, right? So what you really want to do is just lead by example. You don't want to instruct people on how to argue. That's a whole other debate in and of itself. All right. Next issue. Pretty quick one because it's very super intuitive to understand. Preventing disagreement creep. So disagreement creep isn't that guy in the alley that's a disagreement creep and you're like, clutch your purse when you walk by him, okay? It is the idea that you start disagreeing on one subject, and as you begin to talk about that, you found another subject that you don't agree on, and you start talking about that one, right? Here's the thing. People disagree on millions of things, okay? My very best friends in this whole world think that some of the music I listen to is an insult to audible sound, okay? And I think that some of the things they watch TV are like just offensive to the idea of color television. I have no idea why they're on. I don't even know why people make movies and TV shows that stupid. I can debate my friends about the minutia of their preferences into infinity. But whenever we have a discussion, it's really important to stick to that discussion. Discussions, and this is a huge point, are not opportunities to align your views on everything. They're only opportunities to learn and exchange information and possibly align your views closer to the truth on just the one thing you're discussing. And the least productive argument of all time is 5 different arguments at once, or an argument that starts somewhere and goes somewhere else. You want to stick to the issues at hand, right? Here's the deal. It's up to you to make the decision as to where you want to work towards the truth, right? So here's the deal. Unless someone says something that directly supports the position in contention, you can just ignore those points, right? So for example, someone's like, I think that, our rec center at our city is spending too much money. And you're like, okay, let's talk about that. And they're like, also, I think that sanitation's spending too much money. Does that have to do with the rec center? Not really, no. So you go, okay, well, I hear that. Let's talk about the rec center, right? Does that make sense? So unless the issue is so they say, I think a rec center is spending a lot of money because of this one other thing, that may be fine to debate because it feeds into the rec center problem. But if you're there to talk about the rec center spending, you don't want to go over and talk about sanitation or something like that because it's a different issue altogether. The worst thing you can have is 5 hours of debate, and it turns out you just branched into 10 other debates and just have nothing to show for it. So you got to bring the debate back in what we're actually talking about, discussing the actual issues. Right? Here's the deal. This is a trick or a technique that needs to be used in measure. You can only be used sometimes, but here it is. You can even ignore faulty assumptions that they've made if you think you can make big gains towards the truth without having to address those faulty assumptions, right? We'll give an example of that in a second. So I suppose I'll just give one, right now. You don't have to talk about the difference. Let's say you're a vegan and you're trying to convince someone that, the value of not eating meat from a moral perspective. Let's say that you have some individuals, talking to 2 people, and some individuals, don't support factory farming, but some do support factory farming. You don't, factory farming, if you had to choose as a vegan, you'd probably be like, well, factory farming is way worse. I want to get rid of that for sure. And maybe individual farming is okay, or just more ethical farming is better. Yes, but if you're talking about just the elements of core veganism and you're just trying to give that perspective, you might not want to get into the minutia of the faulty assumption that all farming is the same. Maybe these 2 individuals think whatever, farming's all the same. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's big chasms. But to communicate the core essence of veganism, you might not have to get into those faulty understandings. So as long as a faulty understanding doesn't really imbue anything on the core issues you're discussing, you might just leave it alone, because how much faulty understanding brings people to all kinds of conclusions? Well, tons. If that faulty understanding is a chasm to directly understanding issues, you have to go through it at some point. But if it's tangential, just don't worry about it. That's another issue for another time, right? Core veganism, you have that discussion. People are like, wow, thanks for making me think. I'm actually going to consider being vegan now. Maybe next week, next month, or next year, whoever still thinks factory farming and alternative, more ethical farming are the same, then you can talk to them, right? And be like, hey, let's talk about factory farming versus ethical farming. That's its own debate altogether. If you try to just do everything at once, right, you're going to be like, hey, being a vegan is a good idea. And they're going to be like, well, farming is just fine. And you're like, wait a minute, there's two different kinds of farming here, and you're conflating. They're like, well, it's all the same. Well, this is just crazy. You get into 3 debates, you're going to lose all of them. In the sense, remember, what's losing a debate? Not being able to convince anyone of anything, and not being able to learn. For sure, because it's just going to be spread too thin, right? Let's see. I guess it's a very similar point. You got to try to, so you have to try to ignore related disagreements brought up at any point during the conversation that's not really immediately relevant to what you're discussing, right? You got to really, and some of these are incredibly tough to resist. Someone says, I think weight training is bad for sport. And you're like, all right, let's take that on. And they go, and halfway through that discussion, they say, well, this reason, that reason, and don't even get me started on supplements and how terrible they are. And you go, oh my God, I want to debate that so bad. Don't, because it's going to take you away from what you're really doing, right? You want to, once you pick your argument, once you pick the discussion, finish it out. You can egress eventually if you don't want to finish it out. You can always leave. We'll talk about how to do that later. You don't want to get yourself into an argument where you're just like, yes, we're just going to destroy this one issue. You don't want to do that, because if you start disagreeing on all these tangential points, you'll lose the issue. You'll lose what you're talking about, and you'll accomplish nothing. So you can do one of two ways. You can discuss, let's say you have 2 hours for a discussion. You can have productive inroads on one issue for 2 hours, or you can have discover that you disagree with this person on 8 other things and just intro all these disagreements. It takes the same amount of time. Which one do you want more? There's progress on one side. There's not progress on the other. Let's see, what's next? So, example of disagreement creep, right? Here's an underlying issue. So, example of underlying disagreement creep. So, a communist, you're debating communist. So, a communist thinks the government should be involved more highly in healthcare, but you think it needs to be involved less, right? Speaking just about the issue of healthcare is okay. You don't have to try to talk them out of being a communist, okay? You don't have to try to rely on the government's proper role and proper scope. Right? So if a person just happens to be a communist and they think that healthcare needs to be government controlled, more expanded government control. You just happen to think on the other end that healthcare needs to be more privatized, or government needs to be involved in healthcare less. So, here's their view on healthcare, here's yours. Under this view, they have communism buttressing it. Under your view, you have whatever, who cares? It could be libertarianism, could be just pragmatism, could be anything. And you don't have to attack this whole blob here to get at this. You can just directly, because remember, healthcare of government control versus private control has its own merits and demerits that you can address quite clearly. You might not have to ever talk about being a communist or not. You just talk about this versus that. Imagine something less related to the philosophy, like fighter airplane design. Imagine the Soviet Union and Russia debating on which kind of fighter airplane design is better. One country's communist, one country's capitalist. Well, fighter airplane design doesn't really have anything to do with an economy. It's just like laws of physics and military dynamics and electronics. That's all you're really debating. So why even go, well, of course you communists would make the wings shaped like this versus like that, but that's nonsense, right? So when you talk about healthcare, you may be able to get away with actually addressing communism. Why is that a good thing? Because people may be very much inclined to change their opinions on healthcare to some extent. But what is your chance of disproving and reintroducing someone's core philosophy in an online debate or even face-to-face? Very small. That kind of thing takes years of a personal relationship to change, or a personal journey on their part that doesn't even have to do anything with you. So it's probably a good idea to stick away from being like, oh, you like healthcare to be a government thing because you're a communist and that's bad. Oh my God, you got yourself into an unwinnable argument. It's going to take forever. Stick to the issues. Very good idea. Now here's an example of a tangential one. So if a libertarian, during a discussion of government's proper role in healthcare says, and that's how government messes up education too, you don't have to go argue about education as well. You're like, oh, I can argue about that too. So, crazy libertarian says, well, this is just how government messes up healthcare, what you're talking about. They go, well, they mess education up like that too. Let's talk about that. Too much. Let's stick to healthcare. Let's finish out the healthcare discussion, actually make some inroads, and then maybe free time or sometime never, you can talk about the education problem, right? Really good idea. So there's 2 problems we want to avoid. We want to avoid argument creep deep into the underlying belly unless necessary of a philosophy or of a disagreement. You just want to talk directly most of the time. And we want to prevent offshoots from being something we argue about as well. Stick to the core issues, right? There's too much knowledge in the world about everything to broach in one talk. And really, sometimes you look at internet debates and it seems like people are trying to come to a consensus on everything. They go, wait a minute, we agree on this and this and that, but did you say that this and this and that? And another argument will start. I don't even know what the point of that stuff is, right? Do we learn something discussing all issues at once? A little bit, but it's mostly just intros. You never get really deep on a subject unless you stick to the subject. Our big advice here with this lecture, stick to one subject, politely resist tangential arguments or core underlying issues that have nothing really to do with the 2 discussions going on that are really important, right? Next point, second to last for the lecture, on specifying and quantifying disagreements. Here's the deal. A lot of disagreements are really hard to nail down exactly what it is we're disagreeing on because of a lack of specific and quantifiable claims. Here are some examples. Football players claim that you're going to debate. Football players are tougher than strongmen. Okay, imagine you had to debate that. What kind of evidence would you present? What kind of counter evidence would you expect? Hold on, what the hell does tough mean? How do you quantify toughness? Who's tougher, a mixed martial artist or an ultra endurance runner who runs 100 miles at a time? Because if you ask the ultra endurance runner, they're going to say, oh, MMA guy's tougher. I don't want to get punched in the face. And you ask the MMA guy, mixed martial arts guy, hey, can you run 100 miles like the endurance runner? They're going to be like, are you out of your fucking mind? That person's a warrior. I sure as hell hope they don't learn MMA and come in the ring with me, because anyone that can run 100 miles straight without quitting is scary. So all of a sudden, both sides don't even think they're the toughest, right? What does tough really mean? We can get into that, and we're not going to get into it here, how to quantify toughness. But before, if you were going to debate it, you're going to want to quantify it, because you can talk around the term for forever, right? Just like we want to define terms way before we start talking about disagreements. We want to define exact disagreements. What is it that we're really arguing? Both the terms and the nature of the disagreement as well. Here's another one. Strong men are stronger than powerlifters. That claim, what does it mean strong? Is strong how much you can squat, bench press, and deadlift? Because the powerlifters win that one. But is strong how much you can pick up of just an oddly shaped rock and just fucking pick it up and put it on something? I mean, that's a core, fundamental strength, is can you pick something heavy off the ground and put it on something? Some people say that's strength. Some people say strength only has to be measured in very technical ways. Bench press, squat, deadlift, they're very, very precise. They're easy to measure, etc. There's no agreed upon definition, by the way, of what strong is from any one of those. So when we say that powerlifters are stronger, strongmen are stronger, before we ever get to there, we have to agree with the opposing party. Okay, how are we going to define strength, and exactly how are we going to measure it? Because otherwise, we don't even know what we're disagreeing. Here's another one. Ed Cohen, was stronger than Chad Wesley Smith, powerlifter, right? Are we talking about relative or absolute strength? Relative strength for sure. Absolute strength, probably not, right? Depending on which numbers you use. Are there adjustments for equipment use? Most of Ed Cohen's meets were done on some kind of equipment. Most of Chad Wesley Smith meets, or all of them, I think, have been done with no powerlifting equipment whatsoever. And what lifts are we talking about? Who squatted more, who benched more, who deadlifted more? This kind of stuff matters, right? So when you even compare individual lifters in an individual sport, you say who's stronger. Just as an example, it's by no means clear what it is you're talking about. You would think this is a joke, but you go on any strength forum on the internet and you say, well, I think this person's strongest, or this and that, and you'll have crazy debate coming out of left field from people like, you say, oh, this guy's super strong because he can shoulder press a lot, and someone will be like, nope, he's not strong because his deadlift's not strong. But that's a different lift altogether. They don't care, because a lot of people are fine having non-specific, non-quantified disagreements. They just feel like disagreeing, and then good luck to anything else, right? Here's the deal. The more asking, right, the more you can get specific about disagreements and claims via asking a person and clarifying what they mean and clarifying what you mean, the more you can quantify, right, and the easier the discussion will be to resolve. The more you can get things to hard numbers, the better the discussion goes. So, for example, if you're talking about which education system, something really, really esoteric, which education system is better, Finland's or Sweden's? Better? What the hell does that mean? Well, at least try to get your party to agree, or ask them what they think a quantifiable measure of education progress is. You could say, well, okay, how about we take 10 years of international test scores, one international standardized test that both countries take in the same language or in their own language, and they're renormed into international test scores. Let's see what colleges they get accepted to, elite schools in the United States or in Europe or England or something. Those kinds of numerical, quantifiable data, if you can get someone to say, okay, how about this? Test scores, what kind of schools they get into, and future employment, how far they climb up the hierarchy, like how many CEOs of Fortune 500 companies turn out to be from Finland versus Sweden, etc. If you get them to agree with you, okay, that's what we really mean by educational attainment, now it's an super easy argument, because you just go right to the data, and that data is all available. You go right to the data and go boom, boom, boom. Oh, wow, turns out you were right. Finland is a little better than Sweden, or Sweden a little better than Finland, right? Both people learn, and both people get access to the truth. But the longer you prevent yourself from defining clearly what it is that would define a victory or defeat, or rather what it is that we're actually talking about, the more nebulous it is, and the less likely you're ever going to get to the truth. Finally, last point for today is on confirming disagreements. Here's the deal. You want to ask for confirmation on what it is you're disagreeing. You don't want to assume disagreements. Remember earlier we talked about you don't want to tell a person that, oh, this is what you think, this is what we disagree about, because they might not even disagree about with you on that, right? You don't want to attack disagreements after assuming them, okay? At the very least, you want to ask them what they disagree about because you can narrow it down a lot and save yourself both a bunch of time. Imagine there's like 5 things you really think a person's saying, and you're like, well, you're saying this, and this is wrong because that. They're like, well, I'm actually not saying that. And just one of those things is something they were really saying. What a frustrating waste of time. You pissed away 4 conversations on just one that was actually productive. Maybe if you asked them beforehand, okay, so what is it that we disagree with here? And they go, just this one thing. Then you could have had all that time to really dive in deep on that, right? One way to say it would be like, so these are kinds of the big questions here between us, right? Blah, right? So what we're really asking is, does McDonald's make the better double cheeseburger or is it Burger King? Is that kind of what we're talking about? And they go, no, we're talking about the chicken nuggets. And then boom, perfect. That's just talk about that. Or they're like, yep, that's what we're talking about. And then later you can use the quantification stuff. So let's kind of figure out what it means to be a better double cheeseburger. And then they can be like, well, okay, taste tests by anonymous third parties to try to figure out which one's better, which one's worse. We go, okay, that's great. And then we go right to it. Does that make sense? So you want to make sure that you confirm with them what the disagreement is about, right? And that confirmation is really important. So you say things like, can you let me know if we're on the right track here? Remember, you're asking them to tell you what the disagreement is because, like, if you hear it from them, that really is the disagreement. You don't ever want to tell people the disagreement because you could be wrong and you just waste a lot of time. The thing is here, you don't want the phrasing to be overly obnoxious or interfere with the real discussion too much, coming off as rhetorical. You don't want to baby people. You don't want to take a fake voice and be like, okay, tell me what you think if that's not really what you're talking about. So you want to be a little bit more real about it. You say, all right, hey, listen, here's the deal. What's a good cheeseburger to you? What are we going to talk about when we say, was McDonald's or is it Burger King? You don't want to be like, oh, I really love your perspective, and I think we're all beautiful creatures of the universe. Cheeseburgers are great, and we've agreed to that. Now we just have to ask, what's the better cheeseburger? Am I right? Tom, is that really what you think? What's your heart of hearts telling you? You don't want to go overboard with this crap, but you want to be nice and upfront. You want to be polite, and you want to say, listen, let's figure out what's going on. Tell me what the disagreement is, and we can get somewhere. That makes sense? So now at this point, whole lecture up to here, at this point you have precise, more quantifiable disagreements. They sit in a background of agreement that you've been doing, so they agree with most of the stuff on you. You've just got this little pinnacle that you disagree with, right? And there's an amicable atmosphere. The person by now, at least to some extent, at least more than they otherwise would, feel like you're on the same team working towards the truth. In the next lecture, we're going to finally talk about actually reducing the disagreements themselves, finding the truth, and so to speak, working on the meat and potatoes of the argument. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time.